Thanks, Tom. Thanks for having me here today. It's all because of Bill and Hans from the Netherlands, because in the usual case, I wouldn't have been here. I crossed the ocean once in my life. I mean by plane. It was 2 years ago when I went to the US for attending the American Academy of Religion. And because of the jet lag, I could hardly speak. And I knew that this event would fall during the month of Ramadan. So plus the jet lag, I'm fasting, so I thought what would happen. But because of the interesting topic that I love too much, because of my intimate relation with Bill and Hans, I couldn't say no. And I'm happy. I don't have problem with jet lag till now. We will see. And I will speak to you today about the Prophet of Islam and people with disabilities. This topic has been suggested by Bill as well. I didn't handle this in my book on Islam and disability, maybe because it's too difficult, but I had to do it. So I will do my best. One of the great problems once you want to deal with Islam and disability in general, and with this specific topic in particular, you will have problem with sources. Where are you going to get information from? In the Islamic tradition, the problem of sources is that they are encyclopedic in nature. So you have, for instance, the books on the biography of the Prophet of Islam, tens of volumes, each book. And in these encyclopedic works, you find everything, but you have to search yourself. And most of these works are not digitalized, so you cannot search quickly. You have to go through 20 volumes or something like this to search for one or two paragraphs that may be fitting. And sometimes at the end you will not be lucky enough and you will not find anything relevant. So it's patience and patience and patience. I did most of this work during my working on my dissertation. And I find that there are four important sources which handle the issue, specific issue of the Prophet of Islam and people with disabilities, and they are as following. There is the one, okay, I can see from here. There is one written in the 14th century, and one in the 16th century, and one in the 20th century. These three sources speak about, the first one about the biography of the Prophet of Islam, and there is a chapter on the Prophet of Islam and people with disabilities. The second one about people with disabilities, and one of the chapters about the Prophet with those people. And the third one, the most recent one in the 20th century, in the world of the blind, speaks specifically about people with blindness. And there is also a very small chapter about the Prophet of Islam and people who had blindness in their life. On the basis of these three sources and the encyclopedic works that I have gone through during my work on my PhD dissertation, we can say that information on this topic, the Prophet of Islam and people with disabilities, they speak about two categories. The first one is the incidence of miraculous healing, that people had disabilities and through miracles they could be healed through the blessings of the Prophet of Islam. And the other one, what we can call face-to-face encounters, real-life incidents happening between the Prophet of Islam and one or more of people with disabilities, and what kind of lessons can we learn from these encounters. I have been told that I can speak up to 20 minutes. So I'll do my best to keep time in mind. So I will speak quickly about the first one, and then we will focus a bit more on the second. The first one about the miraculous healing for people with disabilities, it is part of a general scheme in the Islamic tradition that people with piety, people who have a close and intimate relationship with God can do miracles, especially, of course, the prophets, including the Prophet of Islam. And the Quran relates different stories about Jesus as an example. And this happens in more than one place in the Quran, references I have given on the sheet, that he could miraculously heal people who had blindness or leprosy, etc. So within this general scheme, books on, and biographies on the Prophet of Islam related also cases. There are, in the books I have consulted, there are about 30 cases of people who had disabilities and who were healed by the Prophet of Islam. We cannot go through all these cases, of course, but we can mention two important points about the miraculous healing. The first one is that people had the option. It was always given by the Prophet of Islam when they come to complain about their disabilities and what to do with this, especially when they are not born with these disabilities, but they get it because of participating in a battle to defend Islam or whatever accident in life. And they come and explain the situation, and then the Prophet of Islam gives them the option that you endure what you have, you show patience, gratitude to God, and then against this you get eternal reward in paradise. So what we call the patience option. You endure it, you get paradise in the hereafter. And in the modern interpretations, also I have to say, I forgot to say this at the beginning, I feel a bit alone speaking about Islam, which is an advantage. No one can fight me back. But it is also a disadvantage that I have been always afraid to present a one-dimensional perspective of Islam. I'm at the end a human being. How objective I can be, I remain a human being. So I decided to present the ideas of the others. So what I try to present all the time is what the Muslim theologians have been saying, classical and contemporary ones. And I will try to keep my opinion as much as possible for myself. So that I can present to you the different varieties of opinions within the Islamic tradition, and to compensate the fact that I'm here alone. I mean, when it comes to Islam. The patience option, Muslim theologians, specifically the contemporary ones, they said that hereby the Prophet of Islam wanted to set the example of how to deal with disabilities through patience, because there will always be specific difficulties in life that people will never be able to get rid of, that cannot be cured, that cannot be healed, that cannot be overcome. So the only option would be to have patience, endurance, and to accept what God has ordained. So they said this is an example for people throughout life to deal with things that they cannot overcome. The second option, and the first option was used by many companions. So the sources I speak about, they relate many stories about people. They come to the Prophet of Islam, they say, I lost my eye, I lost my arm in the battle, etc. What should we do? She says, would you be patient and gain for this eternal reward in paradise? And they would say, we accept. But there are others who would say, not completely. They would have difficulties with this. One of these stories was Qatada ibn Nu'man. He was fighting in one of the battles, and he lost his eye. He came to the Prophet of Islam, and he said that I lost my eye while defending the religion of God. And what would you say? The Prophet said, yeah, patience and paradise. And he said, paradise is a beautiful reward, but I have a wife. And I'm afraid that my sex appeal will diminish in the eyes of my wife when I become one-eyed person. So I do appreciate eternal reward in paradise, and I want to keep this, but I also want you to get back, to put my eye back, and to supplicate God that I will get paradise. So actually, I want to get both. So, and this is what the Prophet did this for him. According to the story, he put his eye back and he supplicated God that he will get paradise. So we have these human, if we can say, human incidents, people who can endure and would say, okay, paradise, that's perfect for me and that's enough. Others who would say, it's perfect, but I cannot deal, I have difficulties in life that I can hardly overcome. I know myself, I know people around me. So I would say, please try to find a solution. Muslim theologians, they said about this is the medical care option. So we have the patient's option, but we have also the medical care option. The Prophet of Islam in his time, he had the possibility of miraculous healing. But in the modern time, we have to make use of the means available. When we have medical care that can take care of those people to minimize their difficulties of life, then we have to do this by following the example of the Prophet of Islam, who was always ready to minimize the difficulties that these people have. These are about the miraculous healing. Now about the face-to-face encounters with people having disabilities. I will speak about one example. There are so many examples. We don't have time for this because I want to make some analytical remarks about this case. There is a chapter in the Quran, chapter number 80, and the first verses in this chapter, from 1 till 11, speaking about a face-to-face encounter between the Prophet of Islam and a person who had a disability. His name is Ibn Ummi Maktoum, who was blind. Before going into the details of these verses, we need to understand the context. These 11 verses, they make part of a genre of Quranic verses, which is called in Islamic studies the friendly blame genre of friendly blame, in which the Prophet of Islam was a target of legislation. The Quran, God wants to introduce a specific legislation, want to change a specific custom, which has been firmly rooted in the society. And it is expected that the society, in this case the Muslim community, the small Muslim community, young Muslim community, will have difficulties to deal with this new legislation and this new change. So to make it applicable, the first one who is asked to do this would be the Prophet of Islam himself. And the incidents about the friendly blame that the Prophet of Islam is doing something, following the tradition of the community, and the Quran would come and say, no, this shouldn't be the case anymore. Here we have to stop and we have to make a new change. This is the pre-Islamic tradition, and now an Islamic tradition should be introduced. They are very limited in number, these incidents. The verses which we call friendly blame genre, they are very limited, because they speak about very sensitive and delicate but also significant issues that need to be changed, that must be changed, but there is an expectation that it will be difficult. And this is one of them. This is one of the incidents speaking about the friendly blame Quranic verses revealed to the Prophet of Islam to say this behavior should come to an end and now something new should be introduced. So this is one thing. So to see that the classical and contemporary theologians, they say that this should give an indication how significant it is how significant it is to have a specific code to deal with people with disabilities from an Islamic perspective. They make part of a very tiny segment of the Quran. The second point concerning context is that, and here I go a little bit about technicalities in Islamic studies. In the Quran sciences, they divide the Quranic verses into two categories. What they call Meccan verses, these verses that have been revealed before the migration to Medina. The mission of the Prophet of Islam consists of 23 years. The first 13 years took place in Mecca, the hometown of the Prophet of Islam, in which the Muslim community was a persecuted minority from the majority of the inhabitants of this city. And the last 10 years, they migrated to Medina, another city, in which they established the state of Islam, which Islam is not a minority anymore, it is a majority, and there are regulations and laws, etc. The verses that have been revealed during the first 13 years, we call them Meccan. And those verses that have been revealed in the last 10 years, we call them Medinan. The main theme of the Meccan verses is a God-man relationship. The Muslim community, there was a focus to teach the Muslim community about who is God. What are the main characteristics of God? What is the relation between God and his creatures? How to understand the universe in each other. But not about regulations, not about how to pray, how many times you have to pray, not about how to perform pilgrimage, etc. These issues were all settled in the last 10 years when Islam was a state. But before, it's all about theology. And the man-man relationship, interhuman relationship, was handled as an exception in these verses. So the Muslim theologians say whenever we have a Meccan verse including or touching upon interhuman relationship, it means it is something which is very urgent that cannot wait till the Medinan period, which means it is urgent. We don't have to wait till we have an Islamic state to correct this behavior. And this is the case here. The 11 verses, we see that it's speaking about man-man relationship, the Prophet of Islam on one hand, and the person who was blind on the other hand. This was in the Meccan period, although this is not the main focus to take care about these details, but because it's so important, it had to happen at the very beginning of Islam. So these 2 points are very important to know, that it is part of Meccan verses, and it is part of what we call friendly blame genre or itab for the Prophet of Islam. Now about the direct context of these verses. What happened? As I said, Muslim community was a minority, heavily persecuted by the majority of the inhabitants in Mecca. Any rumor, any news that someone converted to Islam means that his life would be in danger. Many people were killed, many people were tortured, and it was a very heavy period at the beginning for the Muslims. So one of the main tasks of the Prophet of Islam was to propagate for this religion, to create a good image of this religion, especially among the influential figures in Mecca, from the tribe Quraysh, the most important tribe in Mecca at this time, and to convince them that Islam is not dangerous for the city, and people can live together. Muslims close to the non-Muslims, no problem. This was his main task, to propagate for Islam, to create and establish ground for Islam in this city. And this could have happened by convincing influential figures either to convert to Islam or to become neutralized, not to become enemies of Islam. He could arrange a meeting, a discussion with some of these influential groups on one day, speaking to them about Islam and explaining the details of Islam, what these Muslims believe in, and to ask them, is there anything wrong about what I say here? Do you see any danger for the city, for yourself, for people around, etc.? And during this discussion, Ibn Maktoum, the person who was blind, also came to the Prophet of Islam. According to many Quran exegetes, also this person was non-Muslim at this time. He came to the Prophet of Islam. Of course, he couldn't see that he's busy with the group. So he was telling him every now and then, would you tell me about your religion? Would you tell me something about Islam? Would you tell me something about the Quran, etc.? And the Prophet of Islam is busy with the group. He tried to wave to him, to give him signs that I'm busy, so wait a little bit, etc. He didn't get it. So he frowned. And that's why the name of the chapter is He Frowned, Abasa. And turned away his face and continued his discussion with this group. This is what happened. Upon this incident, these verses were sent down to the Prophet of Islam. I trust your Arabic. This is in Arabic. So I hope it's clear enough for you. Otherwise, you have to believe me in what I say. We will go through the verses one by one, and I will do my best to explain a little bit. We will not get into every detail. The first verse is he, that's the Prophet, frowned and turned away. He frowned at the face of the blind person and turned away. We have to keep in mind that Ibn Maktoum didn't realize this, that the Prophet frowned at him because he didn't see his face. But the Prophet was blamed because this happened, even if the person didn't see this. And why did the Prophet frowned? Because there came to him the blind man. And the Quran exegetes, they say the word came to him is very indicative, because the Prophet went to the influential figures, the non-Muslim influential figures. But Ibn Maktoum came to him. So this was an indication to him, this is how you should distinguish between people. Those who are not interested in you, but you go to them, and those who are interested in you and they come to you. So, and he is blind, so it's difficult for him to move, but he did his best and he came to you, and you frowned at his face. But what would make you know that he would purify himself, that he would convert to Islam? So you turned away, but you are not aware that this might be the one who will convert to Islam and not the people that you are busy with. I have difficulties reading. Yes, or that he might receive admonition. And is there any moving mic that I can move with? Yeah? Or that he might receive admonition and the teaching might profit him. As to one who regards himself as self-sufficient, this is the influential group, the group of the influential figures, who believe that they are self-sufficient, they are not interested in what you are presenting, because they think they are influential enough, they are not in need of Islam. And according to the reports mentioned in the biographies of in the biography of the Prophet of Islam, that when he was telling them, is there anything wrong in what I say? And they say, no, there is nothing, but we are just not interested. And, for this one, to him you address yourself. You pay attention to this group, and you don't pay attention to this person. And the verses go on, though no blame is on you if he wouldn't purify himself. These are the members of the influential group. You just communicate your message. This is your duty. People will convert, will believe, not believe. This is not your task. But as to him who came to you striving earnestly, this is in reference to Ibn Maktoum, the blind person, and with fear, who came to you with sincerity and with fear, for him you are distracted because of the group. And here is the corrective statement: nay, this shouldn't be the case anymore. This situation should change. Nay, surely it is an admonition. The Quranic exegetes comment on this by saying that it means that there is no discussion about divine wrath. It means that no punishment will come. This is an extension of a pre-Islamic tradition, and now an end should come to this tradition, to this custom. Things should change, and it is a serious admonition, so don't do this anymore. Now I come to the analytical remarks. The Muslim theologians, they said, why did the Prophet do so? Why was he so interested in this group? And he didn't pay attention, when he had to prioritize his tasks, he gave priority to the group and not to the blind person. They said he had to weigh between collective and individual interests. There is the collective interest for the Muslim community, and that is to save this Muslim community from persecution. And this can happen if he could convince this group at least to be neutral, not to persecute the Muslim community anymore. So he wants to save this young new Muslim community. And there is an individual interest, that is the blind person who wants to know about Islam. So he cannot do both at the same time. He has to prioritize. He gave priority to the collective, and less important priority to the individual. What these Quranic verses wanted to say, that this is not the case. And this is how things should be understood and approach it. Ibn Maktoum is not an individual case. It is also a collective interest. Islam, unlike the community in the Arabian Peninsula at this time, where people with physical or health problems, etc., people who cannot fight, and this was holding true also for women, were less important in the community. Because they cannot fight, they cannot defend their tribe, etc., they were less important. The Muslim theologians, they said that the Quran wanted to teach the Prophet of Islam and after him, the whole Muslim community through the centuries, that this group is also very important. Ibn Maktoum is representing a collective interest. How will Islam deal with this group? So Ibn Maktoum here is not speaking for himself, but is speaking about a group that should have a higher priority in the hierarchy of interests in the Islamic tradition, which should be much higher than that it was the case in the community of the Arabian Peninsula before the Islam. So for setting priorities, who should come first? The Quranic verses said you should make a difference between those who come to God by themselves, who want to get closer to God, in this case Ibn Maktoum. It doesn't matter how weak between brackets, how weak they look like in the eyes of the people. It doesn't matter at all, as long as they have the will, the determination to come closer to God, then they should be more important. The other group that you are looking after, running after, and they are not interested, they should be less important. It doesn't matter how influential they look like, how strong they look like. What happened after this incident? The Prophet of Islam expressed his excuses to Ibn Maktoum publicly. And this didn't happen for once. The way that the Prophet of Islam, normally speaking, greeting people would be peace be upon you, Assalamu alaikum. But for the case of Ibn Maktoum, he had a special greeting from the Prophet of Islam through the whole life of the Prophet. That is, welcome with the man for whom my Lord blamed me. Marhaban biman aatabani fihi Rabb. All the time. In order to remind himself, the Prophet, and the community around him, the theologians say, that this case shouldn't be repeated anymore. And the contemporary theologians, they speak the language of integration. How was he integrated in the society? This person came to be the muazzin, the one who make the call, the prayer for call, to inform people that it is time for prayer. And it is very prestigious work, even till nowadays, among Muslims, the one who will make the call to the prayer. He was representing the Prophet of Islam whenever he was away from the first capital, the capital of the first Islamic state. Whenever the Prophet is away, even during the pilgrimage that he performed, the Prophet of Islam, he was the leader of the capital when the Prophet was not there. And for the rest, not only for this person, but for the rest of people with disabilities in the Muslim community, the Prophet of Islam said, God does not look at your physical outlook, nor at your properties, nor at your position in society, but he looks at your hearts and your deeds. And this became a rule. This became a rule. The position of the people in the eyes of God, it doesn't have to do with physical or social position, physical wellness or social position, but it has to do with what is in the heart and how these feelings in the heart are interpreted in real life. Finally, the modern interpretations and modern theologians, they say this should also be taken as an indication for access to education. That this person came to the Prophet of Islam in order to receive education about the religion. So should be the case for people with disabilities. One of their basic human rights is that they should have access to education all the time. Thank you very much for your listening. Thank you.